Kaya, kaya, kaya. Ngitin Nyungar buja nono kulingini. That's the sounds of the old people talking. This is the land of the Nyungar. So the story about place names, in my view, humble or not, it's my proposition that place names is the key to understanding the sense of place that we've come to live in the Catagan Briti Terra Australis, the knowledge trails of the territory of the Great Southland. The boat people that came from the west were Wamalak. They were strangers that came to our shores. Ngalamurangin, my people, stood on the beach and saw the ships come from the west, the place of the dead, where the spirit ancestors travelled when they left the human body. And so in this image here, we see that the bird and the boat are one thing, because in the minds of the Nyungars, they didn't know about boats, but they knew about birds. And so when they saw the sailing ships that came to our coast on our war down, on our ocean, and they saw the big sails flapping in the wind, they thought that they were feathers in the wings of the bird. In their minds, they imagined what these things were, the spirit carriers that had come from the west, where their ancestral spirits travelled to the sunset. So when the boats turned up, the Murangi, Janangi Nika, they saw this. They had a dialogue and they speculated about what it was. And they came to the conclusion it must have been a bird, because eventually on the side of the bird came a little baby bird in the form of a little rowboat. They thought that the big bird had the little baby birds under its wings, just like a chook or a duck. And so when it came out, they said, oh, it must be a bird because there's the baby bird. And then inside the boat, they then realised that there were things in the boat. They were white. So it reinforced their proposition that indeed in the boat were spirits that had come from the west on the bird, and they were there. And so they stood there. Heya, Micha Wamala, Yao Puling, Aliwa, Nunagora Wood Puling Wanga, Ngalamurangi Nika. Hey, you fellas, run and go and tell the other family. Run up the beer, up the river, towards Kajenangin Bow, or the Maragara, otherwise known as King Park, and tell our people, the Wamalak, the strangers are here. So the words and the conversation that I'm sharing with you is not English. It's not Nyungar. It's Australian. Because the inside discourse, the Nyungars, were talking their language, and when the boats came, they talked about what they saw. And so in the next slide, we see from the insider's point of view. And so as a Nyungar who was involved in academy, when I used to read the colonial records of the explorations of Terra Australis, and people talked about the terra incognito, the unknown lands. You know what I do? At first, I had to have a laugh, because in our world, there was no such a place as terra incognita. Because in our language, when we're talking back to the colonial documents and records and informations, we're talking from the insider's point of view. So when we talk about terra incognito, there's no such a place. In our world, this place is called terra cognito, the known land. So in this image here, the two Nyungars are standing up the river from Waiala, or what you might know today as Fremantle. And they're watching the boat rowing along the river. So this is a standpoint from the insider's point of view, looking from the land to the strangers coming on the boat. Kaya, windy balang yao kuling, janakana aliwa. What is this thing that's coming? Is it a ghost or a devil? This foreign thing. Go and tell the family, aliwa, wamalak yao kuling, the strangers are coming. And these stories, these narrations, are talking from the land. They're talking back to the colonial record, the colonial discourse. Maybe they're imaginary conversations on the basis of conversations which were real, which were shared to us when we were kids growing up in Whitecomb Valley, the centre of the world. When our old people told us, Lenny, one day when you become a man, you're going to have to go and stand in front of the people and you're going to have to speak to them. You need to learn to speak in their language so you can bring them close. But when you bring them close enough, you speak to them in our language. Nyungar buja. This is our country. And as a part of the exchange of the discourse between English, the outside, Nyungar, the inside, we manifest a third dialogue, Australian. Who speaks Australian? Only a few people. All right, who speaks Nyungar? Well, there's a couple over there. All right, well, who speaks English? So there's still a lot of Wamalak here. So the thing about it is, in this picture, we constructed it to give you the view from the insiders looking out. So the British flag put on our country without permission. And you know, when I was a kid, my mum always told me, son, when you go to someone else's house, you know what you've got to do? You knock on the door and you introduce yourself and you explain what you're doing there. Of course, the Angles that put the flags up on our country, they didn't knock on the door. They didn't explain what they're doing there. But of course, the Nyungars are always observing them and seeing what's happening. In this next image, anybody recognise where this location is? No, it's not Kings Park. It's got nothing to do with the king. Nothing to do with Charlie. This is called Nyungar Park, or Kartjanangingbo, the hill to look afar. Who's been up to the Kartjanangingbo? Put your hand up. And what did you do? What was the experience when you got there? What did you see? You saw afar. You saw the river, the beer. You saw the Darble, the estuary. You saw the Karda, the hills to the east. So the reason why the Nyungars call it Kartjanangingbo is because that's the hill to look afar. The terminology just explains the phenomena. Of course, this picture was constructed to give a bit of an insight of the pre-world that we know today. If you go to Kartjanangingbo, what do you see? Buildings, colouring up the view that the ancients saw to Harrison Island. No, it's not Harrison's Island. That's Matagara. 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 4 words in the sentence. Mat is your leg. Gara is underneath. Da is the access and up is the location. The location where the Nyungars, when they crossed the beer, left their footholds in the mud as they went across. So when Harrison turned up, which was a long time later, he put his name on our country without permission, without thought. And so we have this discourse in Australia, just like we have it around the world. Me and my wife Lisa were recently in the land of the Angles and the Celts, and what we observed was that there were lines through English place names in Scotland and Ireland. The Aborigines put the lines through it and said, this is our territories, and they wrote in their languages what they called it. So there's an international revolution going on right around the world, ladies and gentlemen, in our time, where the ancients, the landholders, the knowledge holders of territories and lands which have been invaded, or maybe had visitors go to their lands and without permission or without okay have inscribed foreign terminologies on other people's territory. So in this next one, it's about the Nyungars at their Karlak. Karlak is the fire up around Kartjanangbo, Kings Park, or down at Waiwajalup at Fremantle, the crying place. The Karla is the hub. It's the hub where people live. And right around the world in the history of people, when people saw fire, fire is warm, it's home, it's where other humans are. And in this picture here, the Nyungars are sitting by the Karla with their little kurrent, their little houses behind them. And the men that have their back to us, what my grandfather Yellikus Bernal described as the redcoats. Has anyone heard of the redcoats? Who are they? They're Wamala, they're strangers. Or in the vernacular of the colonial discourse, they're the British. The British redcoats come to our territories without permission, without invitation, and went about doing what they did. On the one hand, we might talk about it as invasion and colonisation and things like that. But I've been to university and I learned how to upset the discourse, reconstruct a narrative, recast the dialogue. Whilst they were colonising us, guess what the Nyungars are doing? We were colonising them. Niti Nyungar buja, nunukati yao puling, purangan murongan nilalang, niti nganda. English, yeah, we can speak English. We can speak Bahasa. Selamat pagi, Pak. Bagus sekali jalan ini. Lombok. Banyak orang. Why? Because when we were children, our family taught us to respect people. If you want to know how to get close to people, how to appreciate a communication, learn to speak in the language of the people that you're engaging with. So what happened was, we were being colonised. The Nyungars were colonising through language and communication. And so when the redcoats went out into the Nyungar Budjera, into the lands of our people, they sent people called surveyors. Anyone heard of a surveyor? What do surveyors do? They do cartography. They write maps. And so when they got out there, who was out there? Who was their informants? Well, the Nyungars were the informants. Excuse me, Mr. Nyungar, what do you call this place? This is Kalkani, or Pinjali, or Mandogala, or Queridi, or Porongara. Mula Nyungar Dalangin Ngala Quella Budjera. The Nyungars have many names right across the Southwest Territories. Thousands upon thousands of place names of Nyungar origins litter the Southwest landscape. The big question is, how many Australians could explain what those signposts mean? How many? Because really, when we move to the future, when we go to the future, the Nyungars who have people in our territories want people to understand their connection to the country. The connection will come through dialogue, or what we call wanga, speaking and communicating, so that people can connect to the land, they can connect to the culture, they can connect to one another. Not necessarily rejecting other languages. I'm not saying no English. We're not saying no Irish. We're not saying no Chinese. We're not saying no Bahasa. But what we are saying, in the territory of Australis, the Karajan Bidi, the knowledge trails of our land, is locked in the place names with the ancient bedrock knowledge of the nation where we live. And it's my hope and my dream and my desire that one day in the future all Australians will speak in the home language. Nyungar buja, Nyungar report word pulling, Nyinalang, Ngala Dalangi. We will get together and speak to one another in the ancient languages of the homeland of the Terra Australis, the southern lands, otherwise known as Australia. So in the next and final image, this is the aspiration. I talked about the beginning, or Kura, when the boats came to our territory. We talked about when the redcoats got off the boat and they went to see the Nyungars to ask them questions about surveying. They wanted to know where there was water, were there hostile peoples, what roads they could travel as they could go out into the countryside. And so again in this picture, the Bridie, or the Bridia, the leader, is pointing in the direction. You go on this road, it's good for your foot. Nitya Bridie, Wara. Nuna Jan, Wara, Buruan, Nunakatan Yinalang. You go that way, you get sore feet. You go this way. And so the dialogue is about the past, Kura, or in the beginning, that connects to Ye, or now, or the current time, which then leads to Buruan, the future. This is the challenge for Australians in this part of the world, is as we travel from the past to today to go to the future, language and history and culture embedded in the ancient bedrock of this nation in the way that we speak has heavily manipulated English to the extent where we have to call it Australian. Because when my wife and I travelled into the UK and we saw the Scots and we spoke to the English and we spoke to the Irish, we could speak to one another. But there was a lot of dialogue where we smiled at each other and we had to clarify what we were saying. So the message here today is Buruan nunuk word kuling ngalakalak ninalang ngandalang nitya Nyungar da. Buruan nganabula kadich nitya ngalakan kojul Buruan pan ngalakan. Again, to translate to English, when we go into the future, we will talk to one another in two foreign languages, which will then become one. Nyungar, English, will become Australian. So just to finish off, folks, today has been an epic day for TEDx, people sharing stories. The opening was by one of my relations, banging the coilies together, sung out to the old people to guide us. We went through a bunch of discourse and dialogues, hearing what people had to say, and we finish off. And the big message from here, folks, is we live in Australia and we need to continue to the Australianisation of the language and the heritage of the culture of our ancient homelands. Why do we want to do it? Because it's everybody's business. And what else have we got to do? Thanks so much, everyone. Thank you.